think.
Okay, we're recording now, so we don't lose anything more valuable. Those nuggets of wisdom will be forever lost. So we're just gonna have to generate a few more.
Yeah. Well, now see that it's like you have to not know. The pressure's so high now. Like, what will my great grandkids hear me saying?
Yeah,
Um,
it would have been better to record before you got here. I'll do that next time. Maybe you wouldn't
well,
notice.
it is risky though, because sometimes I say very terrible things right when I see you, just
That's
to get the
true.
mood right.
That's
And
right.
I wouldn't want that recorded.
That's true. Yeah, people would know we were appropriating lingo from all sorts of cultures. Goodness.
Not kosher.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk about discipline and forcing oneself to do stuff because, well, partially because I'm experimenting, I suppose, with trying not to make myself do much that I don't want to do, or the way I'm thinking about it is if some part of me doesn't want to do something, try to avoid just dragging that part along and doing it anyway. Rather, try to work through internally what's going on and listen to that, which is still very much an experiment, although the results are promising. And you recently had said that you were sort of doing an opposite experiment where you just force yourself to work all day, and that is also has been promising, which um, isn't surprising to me. Like it doesn't feel surprising that, of course, to exercise discipline would feel good as well. So it's interesting that those two paths would appear diametrically opposed, and yet um, both seem to go somewhere positive. Do you want to maybe say more about what you've been trying in that regard?
Yeah, well, it was just a circumstance of the work that I have to do for my job just picked up in intensity. There's deadlines that I don't set, they're set by project managers, and I just do technical work. And up until this last week, I was resistant to trying to meet those demands. I mean, I would try really hard. I always wanted to be really good during the 40 hours and hopefully outcompete someone or do as much work as someone did in 50 hours and try to kind of achieve that level of competence. But the problem was I had come from a place where that was possible, and I came to a place where everyone was super smart and they worked really hard. So it was no longer able to do what other people did in 50, 40 hours, what they did in 50. Now was like, I mean, every hour is like a competitive hour. Not so much that I think in those terms of competing with my coworkers, but the the burden of this work is really, it's a high load. And so I was feeling that, and I thought, well, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna see what happens. The alternative is I just don't meet my deadlines, which I've sort of tried to develop my like emotional tolerance for not satisfying people with the work that I do. Like, it turns out you can do that. You just have to manage people's emotions. I wouldn't say this directly to my boss, but it's a skill that I built up because also deadlines are, sometimes impossible to hit. And so it's a good skill to have, I think. But not this week, I thought. This week I hit the deadline, and
At the
I,
expense, I guess, of your working over your 40 hours? Is that what you're?
at working over 40 hours, yeah.
Mm,
But not only that, I mean, also working really hard during the day. Just working as hard as I could, which means, a lot of what that means is my phone isn't there. My phone is just not even within reach if I can help it. Um, that's the biggest productivity killer of all. And then it's my own mind, and those things kind of feel related. But yeah, I was working much more, sometimes like 10, maybe 11 hours a day, trying to work on weekend as well. And the thing about it that felt interesting is while you were talking about how you were trying not to do the things that you didn't feel like doing, which I also thought there's wisdom there. There's a good reason there, and I've heard you have discussions on it already that I think are all make very reasonable points. But I was finding that this whole week I was just feeling good. Like, at the end of the day, I was feeling better than if I had spent 8 hours working and then like all my free time sort of watching YouTube and relaxing and maybe even doing some like not unimportant errands or something like that for my personal life. But instead, working all day at this task I thought I would feel emotionally exhausted. You know, I was kind of ready to feel that, but I felt like emotionally enlivened. Like at the end of the day, I was like, this feels good. And so, you know, as far as using feelings to judge whether you're on the right path, that feeling was good, even though it takes effort to overcome that, you know, in the moment to then before you do the hard thing. But it's just overcoming. I feel that when I'm actually doing the thing, it's no longer something I'm constantly overcoming. It's just starting. So in some sense, I'm still using my sense of like how my body feels, how I feel, but sort of at the end of the day, after it's all over, seeing how I acted as opposed to that initial feeling before I act.
Right, right. Yeah, well, I've definitely noticed for myself that when I have a really busy day, I didn't choose the day to be busy, but it just happened to be, I don't know, a Sunday that I had to, go mail something and go do this and whatever. Like I really like that. I feel good at the end of it. And I look back and I can say without even hesitating, like it was a really good day, even though I didn't do the things that I would normally maybe, like if I was going to try to sit down and I had a free day and I'm going to make this day good, that's challenging. I mean, I think maybe I'm getting better at it, but it's really hard to have a good day on purpose. Um, and it's funny to say in an age where freedom is so valued, but in some sense, those days that put you on a path and put you in the midst of getting a bunch of stuff done, those can be the most rewarding days, oddly. And then I also like agree with and I've experienced it too, where if I'm feeling resistance to something, but I make myself do it anyway, or make myself start, and I'm in the task, then I kind of don't want to stop. On Sunday, I was cleaning out the garage, and there was resistance to it, and I said, "Okay, I'll just make myself some tea, and I'll clean the garage a bit while it's like brewing." And then by the time I got back to my tea, it had already cooled down because once I'd started cleaning the garage, I just kept wanting to clean. So it's odd.
A good friend of mine, yeah, he would not want to go to the gym, and but in order to go to the gym, he would promise himself ice cream after the gym. He would go to the gym and then not want the ice cream afterwards. And he like knew he wouldn't want the ice cream, but he had to promise it to himself some days to get there.
Hmm. Sometimes I wonder, like, I feel like I have to keep those promises to myself, although I don't know if I'd make myself eat ice cream if I didn't want to. That'd be a bit silly. But I wonder if that promise lost power for him, you know?
Yeah, it might have been more of like a joke on some level, and maybe it was true once. But yeah, that's a good
Mm-hmm.
point. But there is an exercise is an appropriate thing. That's another thing I sometimes I really do. I'm looking forward to when I can start doing it, but some days I don't. And I've
Mm-hmm.
tried to, not to brag or whatever, but I try to exercise once a day. Like people used to tell me, like, oh, you know, don't do it every day. You got to let yourself recover. I find that that's not true. At least the kind of stuff that I'm doing, it's like kind of more light aerobic stuff. Um, but some days I don't want to do it. I'd rather eat, and I know if I eat first, then I will have a full belly until I go to sleep or something like that. So you have to like kind of stave off hunger, and it doesn't feel great. But it's I don't think there's ever been a time where I started exercising and I thought this is not going well. Like I
Mm.
don't want to be doing this.
Yeah.
You know, at least nothing comes to mind unless I had an injury, but then I would know not to do it. So it's very much like that, and I think anyone can relate to that. Like exercise, who you almost never want to do it. Meditation is another one. You almost never want to do it for
Mm.
some people, but when you do, it just feels good. And it reminds me of this thing that came up in the group calls that we participated in that someone pointed out, I think Josh, that you sort of watch yourself do things and then decide how you feel about them as opposed to you kind of decide how your life is going to go and then your actions follow from your
Mm.
decisions. It might be the other way around at some psychological level.
Yeah. Yeah. You watch yourself and then you kind of reverse engineer, I think was the term. You reverse engineer your values based on that. And yet there does seem to be a big element of that too. Um, on exercise, yeah, so right now, and ever since I've really dove into not forcing myself to do anything, I've been going to these regular training, just workout training every day. So in a way that's lucky. But I've also noticed that in the workday, when I'm sitting down to do something, I'll often get this urge, and I'm listening to it a lot to not to like get up from the computer and go somewhere, and that's all it feels like. It happens frequently. I think I just would always ignore it. But often that will turn into some kind of not a, well, you could say very light exercise. Like earlier, I just got up and walked around the block, but quite vigorously, and it felt good. And so that's interesting. And um, I have also noticed well, on the day it was Sunday that I was cleaning the garage. If I can really stay present in the moment, the distinction between work and relaxation kind of disappears or seems unimportant. So this might be kind of a embarrassing thing to admit, but I have trouble clipping my toenails. It just seems like a chore that I just keep putting off, similar with shaving. And but Sunday I was able to stay in the right frame of mind of just being open to what's happening right now and how I feel right now, which is very related to this idea of not forcing myself to do anything. And from that space, it was just immediately obvious, oh, I'll just go clip my toenails now. Like there's no, there's nothing else more pressing or more fundamentally important somehow than doing that chore. And it's from that same space that I was able to sort of clean the garage and played some video games or did some programming. And it was a really nice Sunday. And I never encountered the struggle that I so often do otherwise, where how do I spend this free time? How am I productive or do I relax? And what's the line between that? That used to really confuse me. And I think in some sense I'm still wrestling with that question. But if I can stay, if I can maintain a certain kind of balance, it seems like the things happen that need to happen, and which seems to, because there's this voice in my head, especially if I'm supposed to be doing work and I don't want to do it, and then I get up and I go for a walk or I journal about it or sometimes I go meditate. There's a voice in my head that goes like, "What are you doing? You're lazy. Like you're just like finding excuses not to work." And but that internal dilemma of laziness versus productivity never really shows up if it seems like if I'm balanced correctly. So that's been nice.
Yeah, it's all relatable, but I haven't had to deal with it in my last week, and I don't recall why. I do know that some of the times the way I think we talked 2 weeks ago, and you said something that really inspired me about what you were doing with your robotics and how much you had done there.
Mm.
And I think that is one of the upsides of sort of really paying attention to what's going on, is that you that you might be able to make the time to do what you really love, like really, really love, regardless of like whether it has sort of obvious value to other people, in this case, doing your job.
Mm.
Um, that's something that I sacrificed all last week. I did very little of sort of the like fulfilling things that I think that I want to do, which is like reading books and um, writing. I had time for like exercise and whatnot, and meditation and whatnot, and walking outside. But those two things, they kind of, just because there wasn't enough time. But also, I think a part of my energy really did get devoted to my technical work.
Mm.
And so, I heard you talking about your robotics, like, man, I just haven't done something quite like that in a while. This like almost artistic endeavor, I would say, even though it's technical, there's an artistic element to it
Mm.
that, or at least a creative element. And the risk, though, I feel like is, I mean, I don't know if they're related, because even if I'm not working really hard, I might just not do those things that I love.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know
Mm.
why. It's one of the most fundamentally mysterious things to me, is why I don't do the things that I love all the time.
Mm.
But when I have the opportunity to do it, there's nothing holding me back except for my own mind. I tend not to do them.
Mm.
Um, and the feelings are really hard. Like, I don't even know why. Like, I could think about it and probably not come up with a clear reason. I could come up with like plausible reasons, but I don't know that they would be it.
Mm.
Um, so But that seems like the beauty of your approach is even if you may not be productive at work, which can feel good, like I'm saying it feels good, you don't seem to be surprised by that. I guess I wouldn't expect you to be that. You can be really productive, and it sometimes can seem like you don't need to even have that argument of like, am I doing the right thing? Just overcoming it
Mm.
can lead to a place where it's not constantly kind of reoccurring. Um, but then there may be a sort of more subtle sacrifice at the end of it all. But even
Right.
that I'm unsure about, like I said, because even when I don't work hard, I don't necessarily do the things that I love.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it occurs to me also that when it's obvious what to do next, there's no internal argument, or that dilemma that I face often goes away. Like for example, I would most often face that dilemma in its hairiest forms, especially let's say a month or 3 months ago, on a weekend where I didn't have anything to do. And part of what freaked me out was sort of the big yawning day that was open to interpretation, and I didn't know how to spend it. And it's different. So if you have a bunch of stuff that is just obvious to do, in your case because you have a superior sort of setting the things out for you, um, it makes sense to me that would there's no argument to have, there's no dilemma. um, and it's similar for me. I'm in the CEO position of a very small team, and so I guess I have some of both. Some days I really need to figure out what to do next. But other days it's obvious. What something comes up. There's a technical issue and someone needs to solve it. Um, you know, or there's a demo day. We do a demo day every Friday, so that the prepping for the demo day is obvious. And in those times, I never really have any internal dilemmas. But then, having said that, sometimes I do. I guess where it impacts my work is when I have a set of tasks or a list of tasks set in front of me, and then I just don't want to, and I have to figure out why. And often that will, maybe even every time, me slowing down and examining that actually leads to something better. Although in the moment it's stressful because I feel like I'm shirking my duties in some way. It reminds me of I've read this book, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Pretty interesting. But one of the things he says is he's sort of arguing against a certain kind of zealous climate alarmist thinking, where if you've met people probably who are so worried about the environment that they take offense at you not also taking action. And he's sort of arguing against alarmism of that flavor in general. And he's saying, sometimes it's obvious to know what to do. If there's a house on fire and there's a baby inside or whatever, it's obvious what to do. You run in and get the baby. Um, but if the whole neighborhood of houses is on fire, it's not obvious what to do. And he sort of compounds the complexity of the situation. Like, what if half the people don't believe their houses are on fire? What if you don't know which houses have babies in them? And in those cases, as the complexity increases, it gets to the point where the rational decision is actually just to not do a goddamn thing. You have to, there's no action available because you just don't have the understanding necessary. As difficult as
It
it
might
might
be,
feel in the moment.
yeah.
And so I guess when I'm struggling and there's a part of me that doesn't want to do something. And in those moments, I guess the biggest worry for me is like, what if I'm building habits for laziness? What if because the experience is I'm facing a task, and there's like the most recent one is a very childish kind of I don't want to energy. Um, and and so I decide not to, and I kind of, do I say I can't do this, or I'm deciding not to do this? I mean, I could argue either way, and the fear is that, like, what if I'm just kind of losing some kind of edge, building these new thought patterns? And I guess it's why I'm so it's so important for me to talk about these things and think about these things. It's in my mind a lot. It's yeah, I worry about that.
But it's interesting because you said as the CEO, and that is a distinction. Like you have this with the work that you do for your day job, you're the CEO. I might have that feeling when I'm like organizing my thoughts for like something I want to write, but
Mm,
that's a like much smaller part of my life than the work that I do for a corporation.
mm,
Um, but you and so yeah, I have clear guidelines, and I have someone that knows so much more about it that I can reasonably trust that they're outlining the right approach to take, and I just have to do the work. And there's a there's like a dichotomy there, like freedom and slavery. Like, sometimes I even within this job that I have, like a lot of like very clear stuff, there's still a lot of problem solving that I have to do. And so sometimes it
mm.
feels like I really need to think through all these options. And sometimes I daydream about having a very simple job, like digging holes, you know, and that there's like less freedom there, but then there's more freedom. You know what I mean? I don't know how to describe the dichotomy, but you sort of want less responsibility and then you're more free in a sense, or at least your mind isn't quite so fatigued from your work.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting with freedom. There's this contradiction there that is coming up in the Saturday calls a lot as well. It's not. It's as if it's not so simple. It's not as simple as just more freedom is better.
Exactly. Freedom is, oh man, that's a whole other call. Yeah, freedom is, it's like one of the scariest things you can face. Um, and to really grapple with it, because then you're responsible for how your life turns out and how your day goes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 2 points I'm burning to make, and they're kind of unrelated. But let me say first that, you're talking about this almost little kid energy, like, I just don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that feels distinct from what you said a few moments ago, where you said, as the CEO,
Mm.
when I go into that sort of deliberation space and not just sort of dive into the task, you often get better results.
Yeah.
If that's true, then it's sort of obvious that this was working for you. Like maybe this is the framework of a CEO. So
Mm.
why is there a dilemma? Is like just that, does the feeling not feel good, even if it leads to, I mean, ultimately it sounds like it leads to something more of higher utility, of more usefulness, even if it's, you know, takes less of that sort of gritty, just get the work done. It somehow leads to something of high utility.
Yeah.
Utility should matter to us more than anything. So what's the dilemma there? If it is it just not the feeling good, or what?
Well, I mean, in some sense, it seems to be a vanishing dilemma. I mean, this does seem to be working. The experimental results are positive, um, but I guess what it is in the moment it's a dilemma because the dilemma for example, I don't remember exactly what the task was, but when I was feeling energy, there was a task I part of me believed I should do, and then another part of me would not do it. That's like the dilemma. So maybe zooming out and seeing a pattern, maybe there's not as much of a dilemma, and it's more that I'm still nervous about you know the scant experimental data, and I'm still working out how do I think about my obligation to work? Although even that, I would say, is somewhat of a solved dilemma because if I'm the CEO, it's my job to kind of see all possibilities and try to route the best map and map the best route, I guess. And so, sort of how I think about it is, if there's a part of me that's rebelling, I really would do. It's in the long term best interest for me to sort of figure that out and mine that in inner conflict for some kind of resolution. So yeah, on a grand scheme, there isn't really a dilemma anymore. And yet, even as I'm talking, I feel nervous about this. I feel nervous about recording this conversation, putting it on YouTube. I haven't talked explicitly to my business partner about this stuff, and it makes me nervous to think that he would watch this. Or we're working on a public project as well, so it makes me nervous to think how anyone would take this to whom I seem to have this responsibility. We have token holders, essentially stakeholder shareholders, at least in terms of how they relate to me. So Yeah, and that's worth noting as well, is that a lot of the nervousness or anxiety I feel about this does have to do with other people's expectations. Um, I don't quite yet know what to make of that. Maybe it's obvious that it would have to do with other people's expectations. I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it certainly leads to more questions, and I don't think I can spare you. I think I want to dig in, to sort of
Mm,
stress test your ideas in a way
yeah,
that
please.
I don't want to make you look bad, but that's where my curiosity is. So, where is when you do this, when you run this sort of experiment, how often is it that you just do the thing you were gonna do, but just 20 minutes later or later
Mm.
anyways? Like, is that often happening, or are you consistently then changing what the most important thing to be done is, or what you have the most energy for? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, sometimes I change it and sometimes I don't. And the time of resolution also changes. This last most major one, where that little kid energy was just like, I don't want to do it. It was, I'll talk just a bit more about that because it was the most worrying because I didn't even want to journal about it. Like even my coping mechanisms. So that was really weird for me. And I eventually sort of got through it. Um, I actually had a dream that helped. I think I told you about that dream. Maybe I'll tell it here if it comes up again. But in that particular instance, it really took a while. It took uh, again. I'm like afraid to say this, but in the I guess in service of the principle of brutal honesty, there was a full day I really didn't do much except. I mean, I could say it both ways. I could be really hard on myself, and I could say I was a lazy bastard all day. I didn't do a damn thing. I mean, and then I could be quite a bit more generous with myself and saying I was trying to work through, what was bothering me about the project. Um, and that as well, turned out in a way that I'm happy with. And I look back and say, and that was time well spent. Um, but yeah, and then other times it'll be, I just don't want to do something. Well, actually, earlier I said that I've been getting up and walking around more. So what I'm learning is sometimes the resistance is not like I don't want to do this, but my body's like, no, let's get up and walk. I took that brisk walk and I sat down again, and the dilemma, so to speak, was resolved. I guess in that case, you could say the dilemma was between doing more digital work hunched over my PC now. Well, let me phrase it better. The dilemma was keep working, be productive, versus um, some quite innate sense of health, I suppose, which is kind of cool to say that. I mean, that's cool that that happened for me. And I guess that's another benefit that I'm reaping is that this is probably a lot healthier for me.
That's undoubtedly true. If I were to think about what the most important thing to me is, if my job was, if there's some kind of corruption in my body where I was not getting enough sleep or not getting enough exercise because I was working so hard, my job is less important than me being healthy.
Hmm.
Like, that's the most important thing in the world. I think, I don't know the original quote, but I heard Naval say it where, a healthy man has 10,000 desires,
Hmm.
10,000 desires, but a sick man has one desire.
Hmm.
Like, once you lose that functionality, once you have the flu, nothing else matters in that. Like, your projects don't matter. Like, who cares? You just feel awful.
Right.
And I think it's real reasonable that everything that we do is just to sort of feel a certain way, or much of what we do.
Hmm.
So in that sense, that is better, and that's cool that you can. It's just I'm so skeptical of my mind, and even when something good might come of procrastination, I'm skeptical of whether of the intent, because intent really matters. The mystery here is I don't sometimes know what the intent is or where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But intent really, really matters. It predicts what you'll do next. And if your intent is just your body's taking over and saying, we need to get some of the kinks out, and this is going to be good for us for the day and for a long term. That just seems good. You probably can think clearer after that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if it's just to get away, like sometimes I found that like, I like writing is just a chore. It's torture in some level, even though I claim to love it. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You're
I love
still you're still
having
watching
done it.
yourself and trying to tell what your values are.
Yeah, I love having done it, and I
Mm-hmm.
like it when I do it. But it's probably the thing that I'm the most resistant to.
Hmm.
And I find myself when I don't want to write, I'll just start cleaning my house,
Yeah.
and like that's good. I want a clean house all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really clean my house until there's something I don't want to do more than
Yeah.
cleaning my house. So it's like a good thing, but then I think I'd rather have like a messier house and having written something, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what I want. And yeah, my body takes over. And then I'm skeptical of that feeling, even though there's kind of a good lower order result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I thought of as you started talking there was um, I can, there's like my habit at first, which I think led, because I definitely identify with what you're saying about being skeptical of what are my real motivations here. Um, and what I noticed is that there's sort of three choices if you're up in front of a task don't want to do. You can make yourself do it. You can um, you can try to figure out why you don't want to do it. Maybe that's journaling or meditating or whatever. Or the third one, which is not really a choice as much of a default habit, is to just escape and run away into something that's easy. So for me, that would be YouTube. And I would like, occasionally it would be very disconcerting in a way. I would be watching myself go open up YouTube and being like, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I would go there anyway. And depending on, you know, how I guess messed up my internal state is, I could be stuck there for a longer or shorter time. And but I guess the hopeful thing is that I do find that I don't I seem to be getting better at not doing that escaping thing, because I'm again really trying to go this third way of like examining why I'm, or at least listening to what the real resistance is, um, rather than just because sometimes I think a lot of times we run away not just from the situation but even from how we feel from the situation. Another example, I'm not jumping around too much here, but I used to have trouble in the mornings where I would kind of without reason. I mean, I look back and see it was just a mental habit I'm still working on, but what used to be quite a bit worse, where in the mornings I was already kind of upset about the day. Um, when on the weekend I was already stressed about what am I going to do. On the weekday I was already stressed about having to get up early, and there was no reason for it. It just somehow that became a habit in my head from childhood. I don't know where exactly. Well, I could theorize, but it's not really relevant. And so I guess the point I'm trying to get to is a resolution or a way to deal with that was actually just to notice the feelings and not even really address them, but just notice in the morning, like, oh, I feel kind of shit. Just kind of mentally moving myself more in contact with that feeling. And a lot of times that would just make it dissipate. And I wouldn't have to escape that feeling by sleeping in more. For example, that was the escape in the mornings. I just want to keep sleeping and not get up. Um, so, so I guess what I'm finding is that I'm gaining faith in my natural kind of reactions, even if I don't understand them first, because it seems to be that the more I relax and assume that there's a reason for this, the that negative voice of like you're just being lazy is never actually correct. It's like it's like this. It's almost like it's starting to feel like a myth. Like what does it even mean for me to call myself lazy? Does that even make sense? I'm not really sure. It's still an open question for me.
Yeah, it's the right question for sure. I don't actually know. I can say these things about how it feels good to be productive, and I also say that it matters to be productive. Um, but I'm open to the idea that laziness may be like a cultural myth. But I'm not so sure I do. I mean, part of me, even for, I think that's kind of the thing I wanted to see if I could push back against, or not push back against, but rescue the need, the importance of being productive even when you didn't want to be. You know, like that's sort of a
Mm,
thing that I thought, like, that seems true. Can I justify it?
mm,
Um, it's one of those things that seems obvious to our culture at some level. And so then we have the laziness as the label for the not
yeah.
doing that obviously good thing.
Mm,
But can I get away from that and just use intuition to say like whether it's good or bad? And I think part of what I was thinking about is how I know the work that I need to do, it needs to get done by someone. Like it's very much like, was this done or not? If
mm,
it's not done, someone has to do it. You're the best, I am the best person to do that work because I'm already in the project, immersed in it.
mm,
And it matters that it gets done. I think that's
mm,
one of the good things about my job and the good things I think about your job as well. I mean, I know, I'm almost certain about your job as well, that you're doing what you want to be doing
mm.
from
What's
what I know about
important,
the course of your life. Yeah.
right?
At least you're in the arena. Certainly you're
Mm,
in the arena. And like for me, it's like I'm doing stuff related with energy and very often renewable energy. Um, I guess I don't care about the renewable so much as that it's clean and that it's doesn't produce uh, carbon.
mm,
And that being involved in that, like someone needs to do that. I don't mind doing it. I like doing it on some level. And that's kind of enough. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to rescue my point. There's some part of me like that. I think that anything is almost can be worth doing if
mm,
it increases utility for the world. Like someone that's a janitor or cleans the toilets, sweeps the floor. It may not feel good to do that job, but you
mm.
can also imagine someone zenned out and sweeping a floor
Right, right.
and even cleaning a toilet with chemicals. That one maybe is a little harder to suffer, but
Well, I mean, I mean, I would to strengthen your point there. I mean, if we just talk about a household, if you're a bachelor, you do need to sweep the floors and mop and clean the toilet and stuff. And it it might be onerous, but it's pretty easy to imagine being in. I don't know if a flow state is the right word, but doing it as a matter of course, like, oh, I'm going to clean the toilet. It's dirty or whatever. Um, I think again, as long as you're not as long as you're not too stressed about outside things, it would feel there would be no conflict internally. I'm going to mop the floors. I don't like that they're dirty. It's a meaningful action. And so I mean, I guess going back to the janitor thing, we kind of, the janitor position is sort of the poster child for unpleasant jobs. I wonder why exactly that is. I mean, on some on some level, it's obvious why it is. It's you're like, cleaning poop and stuff like that. That's not great. I don't know what point I'm trying to make there exactly.
I mean, it's just clear there's some things we don't want to do, but if we didn't do them, if no one did them, like things would fall apart. Janitors are a really clear point there.
Hmm.
And I'm sort of happy with that choice. I mean, I guess we could all be enlightened if we were all enlightened, and so no one would even register wanting a clean home or something like that. I don't know if that's necessarily that maps onto enlightenment. Um, but I imagine if we were all enlightened, we wouldn't have this problem of wanting to want things.
Hmm.
That's kind of a big problem sometimes. I want something and I want it to be a good thing, but sometimes it's YouTube. But then I get into YouTube, I'm like, I don't even really want this, but it's a little barrier to doing something.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but we have to, I don't know how that, I guess I would like to be enlightened. That'd be kind of cool. Leave all this behind and be content to meditate all day.
Hmm.
Um, but because I don't know what that project looks like. It's a very difficult project. And for now, I have to live in the real world. And in the real world, like, I'm going to want things. I want a clean house and I want clean energy
Mm-hmm.
and I want things to get done. And so maybe it's coping, maybe it's just forcing because I'm not enlightened
Mm-hmm.
that I have to um, come up with or take part in cultural myths that productivity is good. Like, again, just stress the point, would we really care about all this if we were all just able to sit in empty rooms doing nothing and being satisfied with that? Probably not. Like, it wouldn't matter if we had clean cars
Mm-hmm.
and more beautiful cities and less homeless. Like, it wouldn't really register if you were homeless. Maybe you'd want to get to a warmer climate, but
Well, that is. Or do you want to finish? I just have some points to make on that.
I'm sort of out of steam. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I mean, it occurs to me like I have two sort of related things to say. I mean, I guess I'll start with I have this strong hunch that to be dissatisfied as human and this idea of perfectly and being in an enlightened state and not wanting anything and being perfectly satisfied. I don't even know if that's ever achievable, and maybe we can approach it with training. But then the other thing too is like we will get hungry at some point. If we could snap our fingers and make everyone enlightened, whatever that means, we would all get hungry and then die. We would all starve to death because no one would want to eat. At least if we're going to take the sort of the definition of enlightened as never wanting anything, and and then that just brings it right to nihilism. Like, well, what was the point of that? And then it's like, what the fuck is the point of anything? And I guess when I get to that cliff of nihilism with these thought experiments, I guess my first intuition there is like, well, okay, there's must be some mistake here in thinking, or if not mistake, I don't want to end at the cliff of nihilism. So let me back up and find some other route. I don't know.
Yeah, I find that funny. A lot of my like thinking on paths sometimes leads to nihilism. Like, well, that's obviously the wrong answer. Let me retrace my steps.
Yeah,
Like, why does it keep leading to nihilism though?
right, right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, huh? Because I hear what you're saying. I mean, a scary answer would be nihilism is true. That doesn't feel right though.
Could be some kind of yin yang thing where it's half of the truth,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. Nihilism almost sort of seems to be an absolute. So I don't know if that's a reasonable framing.
Well, it's certainly always available. I mean, nihilism is something you kind of can't argue against in a way. It's kind of like postmodernism in a sense. Like you kind of can't argue against what postmodernism says without, truth being not
Right.
so easy
You,
to
you,
grasp.
you have to create, in order to escape postmodernism, you have to create artificial values. Like, you have to sort of lift yourself up by the bootstraps, as far as I can tell.
Hmm. I'm not sure you have to create them. But I think I agree with, I think part of what you're saying, which is like you have to take some kind of axiom. You can't, like pulling it by the bootstraps. You can't, there's the part of what postmodernism says is like, there's no firm ground here, philosophically speaking. And I think there's a truth to that. So to get past postmodernism, we have to, for some reason, I take issue with the idea of we have to create values because that seems to, I guess what I want to put in there is that I suspect it's partially about creating values, but also partially about something more receptive, listening for values, looking out at the world, and almost a more feminine kind of energy to it. I know I'm not really making an airtight, rational argument here, but then again, that's kind of the red flag for me. And this came up with nihilism too, is that I think rationalism, an overabundance of rationalism can lead to nihilism. And you can't rationally argue against nihilism. And so now getting back to the creating values thing, it's almost like to say we have to create the values, it's too rational, too like manipulative against the world type of thinking for me. And I have a suspicion that there's got to be something in there about listening and opening up as well in a way that's not rational. And maybe that leads to spirituality and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah. I have such a confusing relationship with rationalism. At some level, I feel like whatever we come up with, like the best course of our lives, would probably be rational. Maybe not by cultural standards. Like it really might mean meditating at the top of a mountain, or it might mean, moving to Peru and hiking all day long on like a very meager sustenance.
Hmm.
That might be the best course of our lives. And it wouldn't, but not according to our sort of like, um, not maybe from an American framework where, what you really want is to have a good time, have a nice house, family, kids, have a dog, take part in local things, like stuff like that, some kind of patriotic sense of getting what's yours.
So you're
Um,
saying that you suspect, though, that at the end you could call that rational, a sort
w-
of.
yeah, whatever would be the best course. I feel like we don't need to escape rationality. I feel like
Hmm.
it's even rational to be skeptical of rationalism,
Yeah.
because you can sort of imagine how, I mean, that's just reasonable, because how rational are we? Are we
Hmm.
just justifying irrationality and saying, coming up with like some false reason and saying that's rational? That just might be short-sighted rational.
Right.
I think I really just have always liked, I've never been able to argue against the Sam Harris interpretation where, no society has ever suffered from being too rational,
Hmm. Right.
right? Like the Nazis or the communists, where they weren't too rational. We could sort of very clearly say we don't have to appeal to some kind of spiritual, like they were morally wrong because they went against the dictates of Yahweh, or against the eightfold enlightened path, or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Or you can't even say that it's because they had no spiritual. They were like, you could say communists were atheists. Like being atheist doesn't then prescribe anything else. You could say it's very close to nihilism, and that nihilism is the problem. But even then, there's no prescription. Um, and so I think that any even very like woo stuff, spiritual stuff about how you can feel looking at the sky and like sticky leaves on a tree in spring,
Hmm.
how you couldn't rationally describe the value of the beauty of a mountain. I think you can incorporate that and say, well, I certainly feel that way, and it's rational to appreciate that, even if I can't say, well, it's because the synapses and the dopamine and so forth. Like, it's not even appropriate to go to that level of explanation. Like, it's enough to have
Hmm. Hmm.
um, the conscious state feel good,
Right.
and that's all rational. Like, I don't think there's you don't have to be irrational to understand that.
I like agree and disagree. Uh, it, I've seen like John Vervaeke. He's the guy who invented the word or came up with the word dialogos. He he and others want to. They sort of argue along similar lines, and it seems like what they want to do is they want to, in some sense, rescue rationality. I don't. Kind of gives the wrong impression, but they're saying like that we shouldn't throw away rationality, and that rationality, we should really be expanding what rationality means beyond what they might call something like narrow rationality or blind rationality or an over sort of, I don't know, overzealousness with rationality. And they say, look, rationality can be this bigger thing. And then other people will keep the definition of rationality to mean something much narrower and say, look, we need more than this. We need religion. We need to be able to appreciate the mountains and the dew on the leaves. And they call that something outside of rationality. I think at that point you're kind of just juggling definitions, um, and um, but well, I don't remember now where exactly I was going with that.
It's a tricky topic. I have half-formed ideas on it, but I want to say I am getting close to where my work starts. So for the
Yeah.
sake of being productive, in about 4 or 5 minutes, I'll have to
Yeah.
get off to do my
Do your duty.
job. But do you think we could maybe try to come to some kind of, I don't know if we've really gotten to it. I feel like I understand
We
things a
might,
bit better now,
yeah, we
but
might
have
just
we?
end. We might just end here. Just I feel like there was a point I was trying to get to near the end there, but I think we would agree that there's, if we could say there's narrow rationality, and we need to be zooming out of that narrow rationality and sort of opening up to more. Um, but yeah, that's all I got. I think maybe I had something more on my mind, but we can call that here. It feels like kind of a conclusion to me. I wouldn't try to
There is. I
summarize what we
mean,
talked about.
yeah, I just want to say, yeah, I think the, there's advantages to not immediately diving into your work. And for a CEO, those advantages are higher than for a person that has what they need to do laid out clearly in front of them.
Hmm.
And so the different modes seem to matter a lot. But I would say that you might, that it's not unreasonable to be mistrustful of that. Maybe it's reasonable to never let go of the mistrust of that feeling. And maybe that slows you
Hmm.
down from an even grander goal. But I know that it just seems to be true that if you at least have already made good decisions to get you to this point where you already know you want to be working on this,
Hmm.
and there's pressure from like doing the actual thing itself, I'm just still remain skeptical of whether that energy that prevents you or lack of energy is really something reaching for something that's more meaningful and beautiful and actual, or even more higher utility, or whether it's just some kind of, laziness is a great word. By now I am skeptical of its use, but something that's deranging of your life, something that's just not actually leading to a good place. It's just the kind of suffering that we ambient have, the suffering that we feel, that wants us to. I mean, it's such a common theme, I think, that people self-sabotage.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's very often like people self-sabotage a lot. And is that just a form of that? There might be an enlightened way that it gets you to an even better place, but it's kind of easy to see how it also just makes things worse. Like, well, at the end of the day, the bathroom wasn't clean.
Hmm.
You know, the janitor was deciding whether he wanted to clean it or not.
Right.
I don't think that's good for anybody. Maybe he came to a more enlightened choice where he says he wants to be a yoga teacher, but
Hmm.
we still need those bathrooms clean. Is the next guy going to have this dilemma as well?
Right. Well, and on the subject of laziness, one point where one situation where laziness makes sense is when you're talking about someone else. So if we're working on a project together and I don't see that you're not pulling your weight, I think the word laziness gets utility in a way that's much more arguable than sort of self-criticism. So there's that. But I also want to say, I actually want to connect some of what you just said to rationality, because I think it ties into kind of what I was reaching for there, which is, so as you sort of laid out, if I've decided to do some set of tasks, because that's the optimal order, and then I get through some of them, but at a certain point I'm suddenly feeling resistance. I feel like rationality always has a scope. So you're rational given a certain set of axioms and constraints or situations. Um, being rational about a chess game, your scope is limited to the chess game, and you're not, the idea of getting hungry is not even part of your scope. And so maybe what's happening when I get to a point where I'm starting to feel something weird, it might be that my rational scope was the right tool up until that point. And then my sort of subconscious irrational mind is kind of butting in and starting to tap and fracture that rationality. And that is what it feels like when, after I go through a cycle of, oh, I don't want to do this. Oh, fuck, what's this about? And then I kind of come to a resolution. It turns out that my scope actually wasn't wide enough. And what I reap is a wider scope. And so, and maybe that ties into this rationality thing. I do think the danger of rationality is that it's it's kind of blind in the pursuit of what its goals are, which can be a great tool. I mean, it allows us to stay focused. And we don't have enough time, but I'll mention there's a mapping, I think, to left and right brain as well, from that book, The Master and His Emissary. But anyway, yeah. Any final thoughts before we hang up?
You know, you would be maybe in an ideal position if you could delegate all of your work. But
Hmm.
because you then have to do the work, you know, maybe being in the two modes of one CEO and the guy that does the work, that's, I think there's tension there that just
Hmm.
comes with the kind of work that you're doing, like the initial stages of it. But I'm starting to think that if you're just constantly getting a better and better scope, that's just good. That's just
Hmm.
really good. That's exactly the CEO job, at least
Right.
big part of it.
Hmm. I'll take that away. I'm glad we came to that. It's a nice way to frame what I go through. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
man. It's been
Alrighty.
real.
It's been real, real. Alrighty. Thanks for the call.
Later.